Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As always, it's a great privilege and great gift to be here at Holyrood and to be able to share reflections on the work that continues here, especially at this moment when Holyrood is on the edge of a really important development for the future. That is, taking control of the property and having the freedom to look forward in a new way. But what I want to do in the next 25 minutes or so is simply to share a few thoughts, first of all, about why the work continues to be necessary at the moment. Though you can probably make all that up for yourselves very easily. And secondly, just a couple of ideas about being on the way. This morning I was asked to do a little radio interview with Radio York about what was happening today. And I was asked, predictably, whether I thought there was a major crisis in how we thought about health these days. I didn't have to think very long before answering, but I also thought, and shared this on the radio, that we have a very, very odd, paradoxical situation at present, where our culture is perhaps more obsessed with health than it's ever been, and more illiterate about well-being than it's ever been. Health, it seems, has become another of those extraordinary consumer products that we are concerned to acquire for ourselves. We set up an ideal of achievement and balance and punish ourselves for not achieving it. That's perhaps exaggerating a little bit. I'm not saying that nobody should go to the gym. But salvation through the gym and the diet and all the rest of it seems to be a rather inadequate recipe for well-being in the long run, partly because it begins by setting up what I'm not and need to be. A picture of my body or my soul or both, which can be used, is used by myself to reproach myself. An ideal of where I'm not. And it does seem to me that there's something rather fundamental about the good news that we're in the business of sharing, which has to do not with where I'm not, but where I am. With that long journey to the heart of where I am, because that's where well-being, lasting well-being, begins. The heart of where I am is the gift of being itself, the gift of that overflowing, ever-active reality which surrounds us, soaks through us, shares itself through us, the reality of God. And reflecting on all that, it seemed to me how very strange it is that we ever came round to the fantasy that that overflowing source of our being somehow wants to punish us. How very strange a view that is, and what a deep conversion we need to get around it. As if God were all too much like us, a raging ego feeding itself on the diminution of others. But God isn't a raging ego. God is a flowing stream of life at our heart, in our flesh, in our minds, in our bodies. And the task of coming to true well-being is the task of finding that base, that centre, in ourselves, and in the old language of the spiritual tradition, coming back to ourselves, to that reality which is closer to us than we are to ourselves, as St. Augustine said. So that's the first point to reflect on in the culture we inhabit. Yes, it's quite nice in a way that people are not as committed to totally toxic lifestyles as they might be. It's quite nice that they're anxious about being well. It's not so good news that the way in which that comes across is yet another form of acquisitive, angry, anxious behaviour. Acquisitive, angry, and anxious. People talk a lot at the moment about how angry we are as a society. At the moment, the deep polarisation of our political life shows itself over and over in the heightened temperature of public discussion, in a general sense of profound anxiety predicated on the fact that some people are going to be winners and some are losers. If there's one thing which, once again, the good news actively sets itself against, it's the idea that you can divide the world into winners and losers. A careful reading of the parables of Jesus, I would dare to suggest, implies that one thing Jesus himself was totally unconvinced about was any scheme of winning and losing. Jesus is remarkably, recklessly imaginative about who wins, who loses, who's inside, who's outside. And by the time you finish listening to the parables, the whole scheme of winning and losing seems so confused you might just as well put it where it belongs, in the bin. Read the parables with that in mind. I think they kind of hang together. But here's another thing from the spiritual tradition, the Christian spiritual tradition, from the 4th century, from the great Evagrius of Pontus, who says, I paraphrase, but not too irresponsibly, anger stops you seeing things. Anger stops you seeing things. He says, with certain kinds of knowledge and familiarity with the world, when you get things wrong, it's just a mistake. With more important things in the world, it's anger you have to worry about, not mistakes, but anger. That is the ball of high-intensity resentment that we cultivate somewhere in our bellies. It closes our eyes, it closes our hearts, it makes us ignorant. And in a world where anger is so nourished, fed and encouraged by the whole general climate of political and social discourse, where resentment, blame, transferred guilt, all the rest of it is so flourishing, we need to be aware of what we're doing to ourselves. Now, anger has a function, a very important function. Anger can be the generous upsurge of recognition that something is amiss. And we mustn't imagine that the way forward is to suppress and muffle our anger. It'll come out somewhere pretty explosively. No, what we have to do is ask the question, what's the anger about? What does it serve? I was very delighted spending a bit of time down in London last week with the XR people to see the mixture of what I could only call anger and peace in the groups that I spoke to. Yes, of course, the whole XR thing is fueled by deep anger about the irresponsible, greedy, terminally stupid policies that have brought us to where we are on this globe. But Extinction Rebellion has from the beginning set out to model something very different in the way it's protested. As if to say, yes, of course we're angry. That's what's brought us here. Now let's park that feeling of anger and show what it is we value, which is generosity, which is peace, which is celebration. Simply to see some elderly Quaker worthy being arrested by the police and sitting calmly on the pavement chatting to the policeman and explaining very patiently and basically what's going on, and the policeman nodding in a friendly way. That said to me something very deep about the right use of anger. There are people who know what anger is for. Not an end in itself, not a way of displacing onto everybody else what the matter is, but somehow allowing the passion and urgency released by the anger to motivate you to do something constructive and to show it doesn't have to be thus. So you might like, in thinking about not only health and well-being and our mistakes around that, but thinking about anger, you might like to hold that picture of the creative, almost playful balance of anger and positive hope that exists in the best sorts of protest. There is another thing which Extinction Rebellion has modelled for us very interestingly, and I can say a lot more about this, and that is the willingness to admit that they've got things wrong. What moved me most deeply last week, I think, was the admission by some people in exile that the underground protests in East London had almost certainly been a mistake. And for somebody to come and say, yeah, I think we got that one wrong. That says, I've listened, I've thought, I don't have to be right. I don't have to be right. The ultimate word of liberation. It's like, I don't have to be God, which is possibly the best news we could hear. Someone else does it better. The point is, though, we are in an environment where anger is nurtured, is almost privileged. How angry can I make you? Say the newspapers. What buttons can I press to get this rage released? With the result that we make ourselves less and less capable of seeing. So when we talk about healing and well-being, I would say that one of the most significant things we have to have in our minds is the restoration of clear vision. Well-being involves seeing well. Seeing well is part of being well. Restored vision is part of our salvation. We pray for the gift of the Holy Spirit to clear our eyes, to purify our vision, and so we should. No debate, then, about the urgency and difficulty of our situation. No debate, I hope, about the ways in which anger and the short sight and distorted sight that flows from it affects us. No debate about the ways in which we punish ourselves even in our search for well-being. And I've already referred to the parables of Jesus and how they bear on this. But there's another aspect of the ministry of Jesus which comes back to me again and again when I think about this, in Jesus' healing miracles. So often, you remember when somebody comes to Jesus, he says, "What do you want? What do you want?" And that, it seems to me, is an invitation to burrow down into those depths that we're at a distance from. What positively do you want? Yes, all right, you want X to happen, and then what? And then what? What's the most durable and deep longing that you're aware of? Because that's what we have to dig for if you're going to be well. And in a very short-termist society, and a very angry society, that digging for what we really want is quite hard work. I can remember some years ago talking to, I better just say, the ambassador of a foreign nation whose policies were somewhat problematic, saying, what do you think your society, your country actually wants beyond the next 6 months? And finding it very hard to get an answer. I was speaking about the way in which Jesus challenges those who come to him about what they want, and the difficulty that communities, societies, governments, individuals find in articulating what they want. short-term solutions, feel-good solutions prevail. And sometimes we lose sight entirely in the search for an immediate goal of what particular longer-term question any particular policy is meant to resolve. I won't make any specific comments about our current situation in the United Kingdom, but leave you to draw some conclusions. But I'm reminded a little bit of the story of the Lisbon earthquake in the 18th century, when, as the buildings crumbled and the bodies were dragged out, an enterprising person walked through the streets saying, "Pills, pills for the earthquake." Somebody challenges him and says, "What use are pills going to be with an earthquake?" He says, "What's your alternative?" There are moments in contemporary politics where, as I say, I leave you to draw conclusions. But this particular kind of magical thinking goes very deep in us, and it's all bound up with the anger and the fear and the rest of it, which is so inimical to our well-being, which keeps us from asking that fundamental question: what do I want? Where do I want to be? And what is the home in myself to which I'm seeking to return with others? All of that is really just a rather general reflection on where we are, the contradictions of our situation, the ongoing tangles that any kind of healing seeks to move into, and also just a little bit about what those dimensions are in the gospel that give us a clue as to where we have trapped ourselves and how we hear the word of liberation. That word of liberation which says, forget about winning and losing. That word of liberation which says you don't have to be right and you don't have to be God. That word of liberation which says, tell me what you really want. And so, very briefly, a word about being well on the way. The phrase immediately says to us, doesn't it, that being well and journeying go together. You don't have to wait till you've got there to be well. There is a way of moving well towards where you want to be. And there are ways of moving badly to where you want to be, see previous discussions. But being well on the way, being well in the journey, implies a number of things which we need to hold in our minds and pray and think through. And here's one of the tensions, but good tensions in all that. We can be so preoccupied with the goal we're seeking to get to that we forget to look attentively at the road we're walking. And there's the catch. To get there, you have to walk there. To walk there, you have to lift foot after foot. To see the vision at the end of it all, you have to see the flower by the wayside. I don't know whether any of you practice walking meditation in the Buddhist style. But one thing that you do learn in walking meditation is that the lift of one foot and the placing of it down again mysteriously lifts the other foot. As you put the ball of your foot down, it's as if some energy shifts very naturally, very easily to the other foot and drives up the energy that lifts the other foot, and so it goes on. As you come down into this place, part of what happens is the energy that takes you forward into the next. And I think that's a wonderful picture of how our minds and hearts should be working on the way, being well on the way. The coming down here, yes, this is where we belong, these are the people we are meant to be with, this is the place to inhabit, and as I put my weight onto that, mysteriously I have the freedom to move forward. The eager, tense rushing forward where you never really put your foot on the ground, where the energy to keep forward is all somewhere up here, not rising from the earth through the whole body. That's a guarantee of neither enjoying the journey nor arriving at the goal. But that wellness on the way is about both the embrace of where we are and the knowledge that that embrace releases something to move. And I suppose that's why solemn, ritualized journeying has so often played such an important part in religious worship generally, but certainly in a Christian framework where the language of journey and pilgrimage is so powerful and so deep. Whether it's the procession going around the church, whether it's the actual pilgrimage somewhere, whether it's walking a labyrinth, that simultaneous embrace and liberation is what we're talking about. People have sometimes said about Chaucer's Canterbury Pilgrims that they're spending an unconscionably long time on the road to Canterbury and doing anything but getting themselves ready for the tomb of the Holy Blissful Martyr. And yet there's something about that ragbag of romantic, bawdy, moral, surreal stories, which to me is all about the sheer enjoyment of the bluff. All of it, because Chaucer is a good Christian at the end of the day, all of it, finally, about the arrival. And the pilgrimage is every moment of it, not just the landing. And so that really is the gist of what we're celebrating today. That wellness on the way, which accepts the patience, anything but passivity, the patience of embracing each moment. Because it's that patience that releases the passion for the next moment. Our wellness is both the acceptance that we are work in progress, that we are learning constantly, and the life-giving hope that motivates us to step pace by pace along the way. Our lack of wellness is when we have so consuming a longing for the end that we can't will the means, the patience of the journey. Our lack of wellness is that attempt to forget that we learn and grow. And all of that, once again, is part of the fundamental sickness of imagining we're God, I suppose, that we're outside time and growth and change. So all I wanted to do this morning is really to share very briefly one or two of those thoughts about the kind of tension and crisis to do with health that faces us these days, the contradiction of our abundant and redundant language about health and well-being and its lack of connection with the depths of us. And then something about the wonderful, productive tensions of being on the way, on pilgrimage. And having mentioned once or twice aspects of the gospel story, there is, of course, finally that deepest aspect of the gospel story which tells us something about this. When God steps in to transform our humanity, God does not do it at a stroke. God does it by living the life of a learning child and a working adult and a suffering person, as if there is no other way for God to get where God wants but through that human story, that human growing. Why should we think we are spared that journey which God's own self, undertakes? God Christ being well on the way, so may we be.